Please open your Bibles to the book of Ecclesiastes, the 21st book of the Old Testament. This book is part of the Bible's wisdom literature, which includes the books of Proverbs and Job as well. And together, these three books help us understand what it means to be wise, what it means to live life in the way that God intends for us to live, resulting in upright lives of righteousness, justice, and equity, lived with faith and the fear of the Lord. Now, when it comes to the book of Proverbs, it's not hard to see why that book would be included in the wisdom literature section of the Bible, because that book is filled with all kinds of wise sayings that describe what wisdom looks like in so many different contexts and circumstances of life. These are given to us in the hopes that by reading them and by meditating on them, their wisdom will be infused into our minds and our souls, so that when we find ourselves facing the various circumstances and situations of life, that we will then respond with faith and the fear of the Lord by living with wisdom. Proverbs also helps us understand that living wisely, it's not just a good idea, because that will help you enjoy a good life, a better life, but it explains that wisdom is one of God's attributes. It was something that He possessed since the beginning, since before creation. So when God created the world, He created the world by wisdom. And He wove wisdom into the very fabric of life, designing the universe to operate by it. So when we walk in wisdom, we're walking in keeping with how God made the world and intends for us to live. Whereas when we walk in folly and go our own way, we're going against the very grain of life itself. So it's not hard to see why Proverbs is part of the Bible's wisdom literature section. However, a person could read Proverbs and end up walking away from it thinking that as long as they behave wisely, as long as they act with faith and in the fear of the Lord, that they will then experience nothing but success, prosperity, and happiness in life, while avoiding pain and suffering in this world. And so, alongside the book of Proverbs comes the book of Job, which tells of a blameless and upright man who feared God and lived to honor Him. He was a man who was very successful and wealthy, having a large family with many children and great possessions. Job was the greatest man of the East and was respected as a righteous and godly man. And yet, even though Job was a righteous and godly man, he ended up losing everything. His children all died on the same day. His servants were slain and his possessions were stolen. And on top of it all, his body was then struck with painful sores from his head to his feet, such that Job was left sitting on an ash heap, scraping his sores with a piece of broken pottery. And when his friends came to comfort him, they didn't even recognize him, but were so appalled at what they saw that they could only weep and sit with him in silence for 7 days. After that, Job and his friends engaged in a long series of debates on the theme of suffering and on why God allows it. Job's friends believe that as long as you live an upright and faithful life, God will bless you with wealth and success and prosperity in this life. But those who rebel by sowing iniquity, they will reap the consequences as God judges them for their sins. And therefore his friends concluded that Job must be guilty of some awful secret sin for God to be allowing him to suffer this greatly. But Job knew that he was not guilty of any gross misconduct that deserved such suffering as he was undergoing. And so he maintained his innocence while making his case before God. And when God finally did show up and spoke with Job, God didn't answer all of his questions about why the righteous suffer. Instead, God gave him a tour of the universe, asking him questions about the natural world that were just too far above what Job could understand, let alone control, as a finite human being. God then reminded Job that he alone is God and Job is not. That he alone is strong enough and wise enough to govern all creation and judge it righteously. And so just because things happen in this world that we can't understand, things that make us question the justice of God, that does not mean for a moment that God isn't good or that we can't trust Him. In fact, even when life doesn't make any sense and we can't explain the reason why God allows suffering in this world, He is always good and always worthy of our trust. And then alongside these two books comes the book of Ecclesiastes, a book that takes us through a deep and often dark critique of life in this fallen and broken world, as the teacher questions the meaning and the significance of our lives, no matter what we do here, while demonstrating that life doesn't always work the way that we think it should. And often it's just downright unfair. It's a book that, if we truly reflect on what it's saying, can get quite uncomfortable at times. And yet it's in the Bible. Because it's by stripping away all false hope and all false comfort that we're actually helped towards finding that which is of true and lasting significance. And in this way, these three wisdom books come together to give us a harmonized perspective of the wisdom of God in the midst of a very broken world. The book of Ecclesiastes begins with a brief introduction of its author, which is then followed by a statement of his thesis that's going to govern the rest of the book. We read in verses 1 and 2, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. Now, according to Jewish tradition, and according to the majority of Christian history, it's been held that King Solomon was the author of this book, which is a view that seems to fit well with the details we're given about this preacher throughout the book. For he was not only a king in Jerusalem and a son of David, but he was a man who surpassed others in wisdom and had great wealth. He was a man who undertook great building projects and had many concubines. These details fit well with King Solomon's life. A man who started his reign as king very well by asking God for wisdom, which God granted to him along with wealth and length of days, which Solomon then used to govern God's people well and to build a glorious temple in Jerusalem for the Lord. But over time, Solomon's heart began to stray. And he started using his wisdom to exalt himself rather than God. He spent nearly twice as many years as he had spent building the temple for the Lord, building his own palace for himself. And then he married hundreds of foreign wives just so he could secure political alliances. But these wives served false gods and ended up turning Solomon's heart away from the Lord and towards idolatry as he worshiped these false gods and built places for their worship. Some people question whether Solomon could have written a book like this because later in his life, when his heart had turned away from God to apostasy, we don't find him walking in faithfulness. But there are others who maintain that this book offers us hope that at the end of his life, Solomon, after he had tried in vain to find life by pursuing all there was to be gained under the sun, that he discovered that it's all empty and it's all meaningless apart from God. For there's only one place where life can be found. And if that's the case, then Solomon would end up being a good guide for us on this critique of life under the sun. Now, his thesis, as we just read, is that all is vanity. All is vanity, everything. However, before proceeding, we need to take a moment and discuss that word, vanity, because today we use the word vain to refer to someone who's prideful or who's full of themselves. Whereas in Older English, It was a word that meant meaningless. A word that some modern versions actually use instead of vanity, using the word meaningless. But even the word meaningless doesn't give us the complete picture that the preacher's trying to give us. You see, the Hebrew word for vanity here is the word hevel, which refers to things that they're elusive. A good illustration that's been used to describe this word, which is an illustration, by the way, that we should keep in our minds as we make our way through this book, is the illustration of vapor or smoke. Because these are real things, things that you can see. They exist in real life. But when you reach out your hand to grab a hold of vapor or to try to grab smoke in your hand, it can't be grasped because there's no substance to it. It's elusive. It's there, but you can't hold it. And it's this concept of hevel, of things that are real but have no substance that you can't hold in this life, that governs the critique of the preacher of life under the sun. So with this in mind, let's read through verses 3 to 11 of chapter 1, which says, "What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run into the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man can't utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. And there's nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, 'See, this is new'? It's been already in the age before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after." So in this opening poem, what is the preacher lamenting? What is his critique? His critique is what has been called the march of time. That the sun comes up and then the sun goes down again, day after day after day, year after year, generation after generation, on and on it goes. And under the sun, the wind blows on its circuit, but only to go back to where it started again. And the streams run into the sea, but the sea is never filled up, and on it goes, back to the streams, back to the sea. And neither is the eye of man in spite of all that it has seen, or the ear of man in spite of all that it's heard. No matter what has entered into our eyes or our ears, and no matter what we've experienced in our lifetime or in a generation or throughout all the generations of humanity, there's still no fullness or satisfaction by anything under the sun throughout all the passing of time. No matter how new or novel something appears, there's actually nothing new under the sun. The same pursuits, the same ambitions, the same desires have always been, and they will be again in the future. This generation will pass away and be forgotten, just as the ones before us have, and so will the ones to come. All of life is lived under that cycle, under the sun, and all that we do with our lives passes away and will be forgotten. Like streams that flow into the sea that never becomes full, that goes back to the streams, and so on. So the inevitable question then is, what's the point? Is there any real meaning, any real significance, or real purpose to our lives? And this is just where the preacher starts. From here, he takes us through an experiment that he engaged in with his life. He tells us in chapter 1, verses 16 through 18, "I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me. And my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom, to know madness and folly. And I perceived that this also is but a striving after the wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation. And he who increases in knowledge increases sorrow." He says, "I made it my aim seeing this march of time to be as wise as I possibly could. More than anyone else, more than everyone else. And I attained that. And I realized that this too was hevel. It's something like smoke, but it has no substance to it. It doesn't satisfy, because with that wisdom and knowledge comes a whole lot of vexation and sorrow. You see, with all this wisdom and knowledge is an awareness of what things should be but are not, so that you end up seeing more of what's wrong with the world and just more clearly how broken everything actually is. So in chapter 2, he changes gears. And he goes from pursuing wisdom to pursuing self-indulgence and pleasure. We read in verses 1 and 2, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure, enjoy yourself. But behold, this also was vanity. And then he goes on to describe how he pursued merrymaking and laughter, and how he indulged himself with wine, and then engaged in great building projects, pursuing great accomplishments through his work. He accumulated servants and he amassed great treasures for himself. He even had a passion for music, apparently, as he gathered all kinds of singers. And he had a passion for physical pleasure as he took many concubines to himself. He pursued all the things that we put so much value on in the world to find meaning, to find purpose, to find happiness, wealth, success, power, pleasure. And he tried to find happiness in life, not just through things like alcohol and sex, though he did include those things, but also through wisdom and work. But he found them all to be vanity. Not just the negative things that we dismiss easily as essential, but even the good things that we recognize as profitable and productive, which still left him empty and unsatisfied. Then the preacher realized that at the end of the day, the same thing happens to the wise and accomplished person as happens to the fool and the one who wastes their life. So no matter wise and productive he's been, when all is said and done, same thing happens to him as to the fool. And so in chapter 2, verse 17, he laments, saying, so I hated my life, because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity and all is a striving after the wind. And then it seems that he then looks beyond his own life, from his own wisdom, from his own work and his own pursuit of pleasure, and then he looks out into the world, and there he finds only more reasons to be discouraged and unsatisfied. As we read in chapter 3, verse 16, moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness. And in the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. It's as though he looks into, let's say, the law courts, expecting to find justice, but instead he finds wickedness even there. Or that he looks into the temple courts, expecting to find righteousness there, surely, and finds wickedness there as well. And then in chapter 4, verse 1, he says, again, I saw all the oppressions that are done under the sun. And behold, the tears of the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors there was power, and there was no one to comfort them. He looks out at the world and he sees people being oppressed and abused, but he sees that there's no one to comfort them. There's nothing that can be done about it, because the people abusing them are powerful, and no one apparently can touch them. So when you look at the endless marching of time, and how no matter what you pursue, no matter what your eyes see, or what your ears hear, or what you experience in life, you're never full, you're never satisfied. And then time is going to sweep you away in death. It's going to erase your memory, and the sun's going to continue to rise and set over future generations that are yet to live and yet to be forgotten. And then on top of this, apparent meaninglessness. You look out at the world and it's full of wickedness in places where you hope it won't be. It's full of oppression and injustice. Then the preacher adds in verse 4, then I saw that all toil and all skill and work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. This also is a vanity and a striving after the wind. You see, even when a person just says, okay, well, I'm just going to focus on what's in front of me and seek to make the most out of my life, so much of the motivation behind what we do comes from looking around and comparing ourselves with other people and thinking that we need to have what they have and we're going to be happy. And we compare what life is supposed to look like, what we're supposed to own, what we're supposed to achieve, what good living looks like based on what other people have and what other people do. But then he tells us in chapter 5, verse 10, that whoever loves money is not going to be satisfied with money. And the one who loves wealth is not going to be satisfied with his income. This also is vanity. Money doesn't satisfy. Things don't satisfy. Wealth doesn't satisfy. In chapter 6, verse 7, he says, all the toil of a man is for his mouth, yet his appetite is never satisfied. So even though we'll work because we have to, we have needs to provide for, even with all of our working and providing for our needs, there's still emptiness. We're never satisfied. Add to this how life doesn't always work the way that we expect or the way we think it should work, but it actually sometimes and often works in the opposite way. As the preacher declares in chapter 7, verse 15, in my vain life I've seen everything. There's a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, and there's a wicked man who prolongs his life in his evil doing. You see, we expect the righteous to be rewarded, and we expect the wicked to be punished. But sometimes the righteous suffer and perish, while the wicked prosper at length. Now maybe you hear all this and think, well, that might be true. But you know what? As long as I try to do good with my life, as long as I focus on trying to help others, I think I'll be satisfied. And to this, the preacher has an illustration in chapter 9, verses 13 to 16, where he says, I have also seen this example of wisdom under the sun, and it seemed great to me. There was a little city with few men in it, and a great king came against it and besieged it, building great siege works against it. But there was found in it a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city. Yet no one remembered that poor man. But I say that wisdom is better than might, though the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. He gives us this example of this poor wise man who saves a city. He saves a city. He's a deliverer, but he's forgotten. And his wisdom is despised. His words are not even heard, even though he's a deliverer and saved other people with his life doing good. He's forgotten. He's despised. He's unheard. And so you read all this and you're left wondering, is there any meaning to life? Is there any significance and purpose to it? Will my life even count for something? And then when it seems like the preacher is going to finally offer us some encouragement at the end of the book, it comes in a kind of backhanded way, or pessimistic way, if you will. As we read in chapter 11, verse 9, rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. Enjoy that youthful vigor and that life and that energy and get after it. Pursue your dreams. But then he says, but know that for all these things, God's going to bring you into judgment. Go live it up, but know that you're going to stand before God and He's going to judge you. Or in chapter 12, verse 1, where he says, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you say, I have no pleasure in them. When in your old age, the little bit of pleasure there was in this life is gone, and you're just left waiting for death. So what possible value is there for us in a critique of life under the sun like we find in Ecclesiastes? And the answer is, there is great value, there's enormous value. You see, that's the very thing we need to remember about this critique of life under the sun, is that what's being critiqued throughout this book is life under the sun. It's as though a line has been drawn And the meaning and the purpose of life is all being examined underneath that line. In a fallen and broken world that continues with the marching of time swallowing up everything with the passing of years and equalizing everyone with death, whether they're wise and did good or whether they were foolish and wicked, all of life is being analyzed under the sun, not above it. It's a form of critique that's meant to strip us of all false hope and all false comfort in a broken world under the sun, proving that life and meaning, they can't be found in the things of this world. But throughout the book, the preacher has repeated a refrain. A refrain that he repeats again and again as he lets life come from above the sun as a gift from God in the midst of the toil and the struggle. So in the midst of his critique, as it gets dark and unpleasant, he brings this refrain in over and over. In chapter 2, verses 24 and 25, he proclaims there's nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? In chapter 3, verses 11 to 13, he declares he has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he's put eternity into man's heart so that he can't find out what God has done from beginning to end. I perceive that there's nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. That is God's gift to man. This refrain continues in chapter 5, verses 18 and 19, where we read, "Behold, what I have seen to be good and fitting is to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, the few days of his life that God has given him, for this is his lot. Everyone also to whom God's given wealth and possessions and power, to enjoy them and to accept his lot and rejoice in his toil, this is the gift of God." Again in chapter 8, verse 15, we read, "And I commend joy, for man has nothing better under the sun but to eat and drink and be joyful, for this will go with him in his toil through the days of his life that God has given him under the sun." And then in the final two verses of the book, in chapter 12, verses 13 and 14, we read the end of the matter. "All has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil." You see, under the sun, everything, even the best things in life, become empty and meaningless without God. Time is going to swallow up everything in this world, including your life, including your work, including everything you lived for. But you can experience joy even in this broken world, by connecting to the one who made it, the one you're made for. In faith, we can eat and drink with joy as gifts from God's hand, in the midst of our toil, knowing that God will make everything beautiful in its time, and that one day He's going to judge the world, ridding it of all injustice and oppression, and establishing His reign of perfect righteousness and peace. The truth found in Ecclesiastes is that there is nothing under the sun that can actually satisfy our hearts or give meaning to our lives. It's all vanity. It's all hevel, like smoke. It looks real enough, but when you reach for it, to grab it, it cannot be grasped because it has no substance. It can't fill you. It can't satisfy you, whether it's wealth and pleasure or whether it's wisdom and work. You'll find yourself coming up empty again and again. Even if you could live 100 lifetimes and gain the entire world in every single one, you would come up empty every time. Because life is only found above the sun in the one who made all things. That was true then. And that's still true now. And this message from the ancient book of Ecclesiastes is just as needed today as it was then. Because as Michael Williams has rightly observed and asks, we may know in our Bible-trained heads how we're supposed to answer questions about life, but do we really believe those answers? We spend hours, days, even years of our lives chasing after things that we believe will make our life significant when we could have that significance anytime we chose. There's an old joke about someone who is outside looking in the grass for his lost ring. His friends show up and offer to help. They ask him where he lost it. He tells them he lost it in the house. When they ask him why he's looking for it outside, he tells them the light is better out here. How stupid to look for something where it can't be found. We need to stop looking for the meaning of life where it can't be found. We need to look for life's purpose in the eternal truths that God has revealed to us in Jesus Christ. You see, we know things today that the preacher, the writer of Ecclesiastes, that he didn't know back then. That God himself, who made this world under the sun, has entered into it in order to be the cure and the remedy to all the hevel, all the vanity, all the smoke, to our pursuit of the broken things of this world that are empty and can't give life, but we, with the passing of time, just keep chasing after, hoping we'll prove it wrong. Hoping will be the exception. He died on the cross for our sins and rose in triumph over death that time is marching to, and he declared this, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. It's found in him. Thousands of years of history before Christ came have proven countless times that nothing under the sun can satisfy you. You'll never be as rich as Solomon, and it didn't satisfy him. You don't have the means to party as hard as he could, and it won't satisfy him. You don't have the means to build like he built, and it didn't satisfy him. We need to look above the sun to find life. Thousands of years of history before Christ came prove that nothing under it can satisfy. But you know what? Even after Christ came, for thousands of years, we still find ourselves living for things under the sun, hoping that we will prove Ecclesiastes wrong. Or we'll take Jesus knowing that we need him, but still end up living as though it's the things of this world that are actually going to bring us any pleasure or happiness in life. And it's alongside of this futile struggle after smoke that the book of Ecclesiastes comes to us today. And through a critique of life under the sun, it challenges us to find our lives in the one who's above it all. And in this way, it helps us, even as Christians today, by reminding us that our treasure is not found in this world, and our hearts will never be filled or satisfied by the things that we try to grasp here. We have to come to know the one who is life itself in Jesus Christ. And as professing believers, as those who have, it's as we look to him and abide in his love for us, even in this broken world, that we know his life and experience his joy and his peace in our souls, enabling us to live our lives for him in this broken world. So that now, whether we eat or whether we drink or whatever we do, we can do it all for his glory, knowing that he gives our lives its true and lasting meaning, that we have an eternal purpose, an eternal value that nothing in this life under the sun can take from us. And that's ours right now. That's not smoke, that's reality, and nothing here can compare with that. He rescues us from the emptiness and the futility of life under the sun as we look to him in faith and find real life, real meaning, real satisfaction in him. And so in this way, the book of Ecclesiastes, it helps prepare us for him. Let's pray.